Hello students, we have had a lesson which was dedicated to overview of ecosystem and ecology. So basically we saw how ecology is studied, at what levels ecology is studied. Ecology is that branch of biology which deals with ecosystems. So now we are going to discuss in detail that what basically is an ecosystem. If you remember, we had discussed that how the various levels of stratification in an ecosystem are organized, that whatever part is to be studied in ecology, what are those parts we had discussed. Now we are going to discuss the main crux of ecology, that is ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? What are the various components of ecosystem? Means basically we are going to see how that ecosystem works. So when we have to see how something works, we need to understand it in depth, that what are the various components which are involved in it, what are the various parts and how they are interacting. Because as you remember, or even if you don't, ecology is nothing but the study of interactions, and the unit for studying ecology is ecosystem. So we would basically get into the interactions which are occurring in an ecosystem. So when I say that ecosystem is to be defined as a unit which is studied under ecology, I say that ecosystem is a self-sustaining landscape. If you remember, what was a landscape? Landscape was a region which contained many ecosystems which were interacting amongst themselves. When I talk about ecosystem, it is basically the interactions which are occurring. So basically we deal with ecosystem. Who gave the term ecosystem? You must be aware, even if you're not. Sir Arthur Tansley was the one who gave the term ecosystem, that if you have to study ecology, start studying ecosystem and its components, half of your study would be done. So it was ecosystem was given by that person. Now what are the components of ecosystem if we have to study? What are the structural features of ecosystem, and what are the functional aspects of ecosystem? These are the four things that we study when we are studying an ecosystem. So as I told you, what an ecosystem is, it is a self-sustaining landscape. Basically, when I say self-sustaining, that means nobody is providing an outward source of energy. Only sun would be the main source of energy. Rest, otherwise the region or the ecosystem which we are talking about would be self-sustaining. That means it would have those components which would not need any outward dependence, but they would be interdependent. You see, they would be interdependent. So we get to know that there would be few components of the ecosystem which would be interdependent. When we are talking about ecology, we are basically talking about few aspects of ecosystem. Now what are those components? We had studied earlier also that there are two components of ecosystem. One is biotic component and the second one happens to be abiotic components. Now we discussed in detail earlier also what are the biotic components and what are the abiotic components. I would take a review again, that abiotic components are those components which are non-living. So when we talk it in terms of ecosystem, we are talking about the nutrients which are available, which are further of two types. Nutrients are organic nutrients and inorganic nutrients. Now I need not to explain what is the difference between organic nutrients and inorganic nutrients. If a plant is taking nitrate from soil, then it would be inorganic. If a plant is taking humus from soil, then it would be organic. You can differentiate between those two things. So basically, abiotic components of ecosystem are the nutrients which are available to the organisms which are staying over there. And what are the biotic components? When we study biotic components in context of an ecosystem, earlier we did study biotic components saying that biotic communities would be involved over there. When we study it in terms of ecosystem, that what would be the components of ecosystem, and I say that I am talking about biotic components, then there is a broader classification of living organisms. Now how do we classify those living organisms? Because ecosystem functional aspects are such, so we get a classification. The functional aspects, keeping in mind those functional aspects, we divide the biotic components into three parts. First one being producers, second is heterotrophs, or as we call them, consumers, and last one is decomposers. Now you can see in this classification that it is related somewhat to food. Somebody is producing food, somebody is eating that produced food, and somebody is decomposing both of these when they have died or when something has been wasted. So if I talk about the biotic components of an ecosystem, I am taking them in terms of energy flow. So you get one thing clear in your mind, that energy flow is one functional aspect, important functional aspect of ecosystem. So one of the questions was, what are the functional aspects of ecosystem? So the first one that comes into our mind is energy flow. Now what is this energy flow taking place through? It is occurring by the food chain or the food web that happens in the ecosystem. One of the functional aspects of ecosystem. Now I have considered these components. These components are dependent certainly on the abiotic components for their sustenance. So ecosystem, when I said that it was self-sustainable, that means abiotic would depend on biotic and biotic would depend on abiotic, and there would be a complex relationship between the both. And when we study that complex relationship, we study it in few terms, functional aspects, and that is known as ecosystem, and the study of ecosystems is ecology. There is a lot of repetition that I am doing in ecosystem, but you need to get clear that how it is the functional unit and what are the components. Components are biotic and abiotic, we discussed. What are the structural features of ecosystem? When I say that I am looking for structural features of ecosystem, I am talking about the various ways in which I can study the ecosystem. So first one, that the way in which I can deal with an ecosystem is stratification. Try to understand meaning of this structural feature from the English word that is stratification, that is layering sort of, okay. Stratification basically means the layers. So when we study ecosystem, one way is that we study the layers. Like if I'm seeing something vertically, the uppermost level, the lower level, then the next level, we are seeing the various stratifications which are present in an ecosystem. Consider it in this way. Supposedly I'm talking about the vegetation. Lowermost, there would be few in the soil. This is soil. Okay, this is the entire stratification layers which I am going to see. You see tall gymnosperms over here. So this is the highest level of stratification, that the canopy of the tree is the highest level of stratification. Then I do have few climbers which would climb this till here. I'm just giving you an explanation just to identify the layers of stratification. So climbers are at this layer. Then there would be few shrubs which would be growing, woody ones, which would have a lower level of stratification, and yet smaller herbs, then ground creepers. So you have various levels of stratification which are visible. So in a way you are looking the ecosystem from layers point of view. That is one structural feature of ecosystem. Other one would be species composition. These are the two ways in which you can deal with the components of ecosystem. The point of view would be from the species composition. So you are going to study the ecosystem from the stratification point of view. Then there is another way that you would study the ecosystem from species composition of view, that let alone the stratification. Let's see, there would be a few bird species over here, birds over here, few carnivores would be over here, like ground, those which are on ground. Then there would be few arboreal species which stay on the tree. So you are basically dealing with the species composition of an ecosystem, and these are the two structural features whose study can make us well versed with the ecosystem. Now we come to the point that when we have to understand what an ecosystem is, we need to know the functional aspects. Then we can understand its working in a better way. So what are the functional aspects? First one, as I said, that there are four components basically: producers, heterotrophs, decomposers, and of course the nutrients, which would comprise the abiotic components. Now how these are interacting, there would be few functions which must be going on, few mechanisms or processes which must be going on in the ecosystem. So when we study those processes, those would become the functional aspects of ecosystem. First one I talked about, we did discuss, that was energy flow. Okay. But the question that comes in mind is that energy which is flowing, how has it been formed? So this cannot be the first and the foremost that we study. First and foremost would be, we have to reach till the level of flow of energy. Interaction is through flow of energy only. You know, when we are talking about ecosystems, we simply, if I have to define an ecosystem, I would say that anybody who has eaten food would become food of somebody, because who has eaten food has acquired somebody's energy. It has stored that energy in his or her own body, if it is an animal, in its body, and it has to be eaten by somebody else because it is having energy in it. So let us see that energy flow is the most important aspect. We did talk about food chain and food web from our primary classes, that there is a food chain which is occurring in nature. Somebody is eating somebody, then that somebody is eaten by yet bigger somebody. That is what food chain is, if I have to explain it in simplest terms. So basically food chain and food web are there are organisms which are present in food chain and food web. They are conduits of energy. So most important was energy, that we are dealing with energy flow. But let's talk about who has produced that energy. There must be some living entity which has produced that energy, because we don't consume inorganic nutrients directly. You would never go and eat iron fillings or chalk or something directly and not eat the organic food. So we are having the most important functional aspect, that is productivity, that how the inorganic energy is converted to organic energy. What are the processes involved in it? Which biotic components are involved in this productivity? Then the next thing that we have after productivity, first one was productivity. Now when we talk about productivity, there would be energy flow. We are going to come to that energy flow. So let us consider whosoever has produced this energy, how that energy flows from one consumer to the other, or one biotic component, these three ones, how it flows from one to other one. Because exclusive property of converting inorganic material to organic material lies with this biotic component, which is producers, or we call them autotrophs. And when I say autotrophs, I am specifically referring to the plants, green plants. Only they have the ability to do photosynthesis and convert the solar energy into the chemical energy, which is stored in the chemical bonds of various organic substrates that are being formed. Next is energy flow, that how this produced energy would go to consumers, because they don't know how to produce energy. They don't know how to convert the inorganic energy into chemical energy. All they know is how to convert the chemical energy that they have acquired from the producers into the simplest form of energy that they can utilize, that is ATP, because we are talking about living things over here. Now the third one is, whosoever takes birth dies. And when he or she or it dies, it has to be decomposed. Otherwise, this earth would become pile of dump. So there is a lot of work being done by decomposers, which are scavengers and rest, which take up the dead and decaying matter and bring the nutrients which are stored in those organisms back to the soil or wherever those nutrients are required. So we have another important functional aspect of ecosystem, that is decomposition. When you're talking about productivity and energy flow, you cannot let decomposition aside. And fourth one is that on earth everything is constant. That means whatever you have been provided, it would remain constant. If we are having 70% of water, that would become water vapor, that would again come back to ocean and become water. So there has to be a proper cycle of all the nutrients, because there is nobody providing nutrients. Whatever nutrients are present on earth, they have to be recycled so that they are available for the next biotic components, and they would form the abiotic component of the ecosystem. Because I used the term in the beginning, it is self-sustaining. Nobody comes and provides nutrients to ecosystem. Nobody comes and provides other things to the ecosystem, biotic factors. Whatever they are having, those nutrients would be recycled. And how those nutrients would be cycled and recycled, we have simplest example is water cycle, then we have carbon cycle, then we have phosphorus cycle. You never go out to space to find phosphorus, you never go out somewhere to find water, except for those things which are present on earth. They have to be recycled, because every time a producer takes up the nutrient, it stores it in itself, then it goes to the consumer. Now how that nutrients, all those nutrients and components are to be taken back to the soil, that would be done by decomposition. And when we talk about decomposition, we are considering nutrient cycling as well, because all the nutrients, they have to be recycled again and again so that they are available to these, because certainly these are not going to live till eternity, they are going to die somewhere. When they die, the nutrients which are stored inside them, they cannot be left as it is, they have to be included back to soil. So decomposition is an important aspect, so is nutrient cycle. So these four aspects are the different ecological aspects which we have to study when we talk about ecosystem. We would discuss each of these in detail: what is productivity, how the energy flow takes place, how the decomposition process is taking place, and how through these nutrients are constantly cycled within an ecosystem, which comes under the main study of ecosystem that we will take in next lesson. Thank you.